Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and it's pumpkin carving season. However, I don't have any pumpkins. What I do have though is aluminium foil and packing paper. And when you combine these two things and slap on a layer of clay, you're left with, well, a lumpy ball of gray clay. However, it is a starting point and a step in the right direction. I'll turn this lumpy ball into a less lumpy ball by smooshing and rolling it around until it's kinda smooth, at which point I can cut a hole into the front of it. Then once it's been baked in the oven to harden it, I can pull the foil and paper filling out. This then will leave me with a nice hollow ball begging for some lips, so I'll paint the rim of my hole with some bacon bond, then wrap it in a long noodle of clay and smooth it out to create a nice smooth sphincter. Of course, this nice smooth sphincter is going to be the pumpkin's mouth, and what's a mouth without a nice set of teeth? To make my teeth, I'll take some translucent clay and roll it into a little ball before using some ball styluses and shaping tools to poke and press it into a roughly tooth-like shape, at which point I'll repeat this process until I've got a full mouth worth of teeth ready to be baked. Once baked, the translucent clay takes on an excellent toothy appearance, so I can pop them off the tray and pop them into my pumpkin's mouth hole. And once I've got a full set of not the least bit unsettling teeth in place, I can clean up the gums and add a little surface texture before baking it all again, so I can paint the outside in some more bacon bond to allow for a thicker outer pumpkin dermis to be attached. I'll cut this down to size so it fits more form-fittingly around my toothy ball, building up the clay in all the appropriately pumpkin-y sections, making sure to keep that final squished sphere shape of a pumpkin in mind. With my final pumpkin form finally figured out, I can start to delineate the ribbed pumpkin sections by first marking out the location of each section on the circumference of the squished sphere before coming back with my sculpting tools to exaggerate the shape, taking it from a slightly smooshed toothy ball and turning it into a decidedly more pumpkin-y looking shape. Finally, before I add the detail, I'll smooth the surface to a mostly smoothed surface, which, despite this section of the video only lasting around 15 seconds, took roughly 2 real-life hours to achieve. It was also at this point that I thought it might be fun to put a little candle inside my pumpkin like an actual pumpkin, so I'll carve some of the bottom section out to allow for a tea light to fit later. Then it's back to the smoothing, coating the entire surface in a thick dosing of isopropyl alcohol, followed by an aggressive brushing with a borrowed makeup brush, which will both hide the fingerprints as well as imprint a bit more texture. With the surface nice and smooth, I can poke a series of haphazardly placed divots, then fill those in with a bunch of haphazardly selected eyeballs of different sizes. I like the eyeballs being lidless, so I'll just use a silicone shaper to press the surrounding skin off the eyeballs. Then it's time for the final surface details, starting with a bunch of gourd warts dotted strategically around the body and blended in. I'll then follow this up by cracking and texturing the pumpkin lips, and once I've carved away some deeper gouges and cracks and tears, I'll give it all another isopropyl smoothing before cracking out my pot of bacon bond in a toothpick to make the ever-important pumpkin veins. Otherwise, once I've drizzled enough white gooey liquid clay in the shape of gnarly veins around the body of the pumpkin, it's into the oven for another baking, and once it's nice and hard, I can use a hole saw to remove the remainder of the bottom to make way for my future tea lights. With the body of the pumpkin built, I can add the stem on top by smooshing some clay onto the top where the sections meet, using a series of ball styluses to add the wobbly, gnarly stem-like texture around the stem-like lump of clay. Once I'd added the texture and mostly finished the stem, I decided that another eye is always the right choice, so I'll poke a big divot into the top of the stem so I can fit one final eyeball in place. With that though, the pumpkin portion of the pumpkin is finished, which means it's now time to make some tentacles. Well, not really tentacles, more like really grabby roots or vines, which I suppose are the tentacles of the botanical world. At any rate, I've cut some lengths of armature wire to length and layered them into a clay coin sandwich that should fit perfectly inside my pumpkin's pre-drilled candle hole, before wrapping them in a layer of smaller wire and aluminium foil to bulk the base of the botanical tentacles up a bit, so as I layer on the clay I don't have to use nearly as much. At this point, this simple Halloween themed project has used more clay than any other project I've done to date, so any way to limit the sheer cost of materials helps immensely. Once I've built up the base of my Botanicles, I'll press the pumpkin onto the base to make sure it fits properly and begin the intexturing of the octuplet of veiny pumpkin vines. I'll use a couple different ball styluses to add long lengthwise dips and divots into the surface of the Botanicles, inadvertently making them look like long pointy gray churros. Then, in an effort to make them look less like delightful Spanish desserts, I'll run the ball stylus back and forth across the churros horizontally to create a wobbly texture similar to the eyeball vine on top. With the Botanicles properly textured, I can start to twist and bend them into appropriately spooky curls and swirls to make a terrifying fully toothed pumpkin octopus, at which point I'll pull the pumpkin away from the base and start wrapping wormy dealies around the larger Botanicles until I've got vines on my vines on my vines. However, once I fit the head back in place, I felt the larger Botanicles were missing that slightly stabby texture pumpkin stems have, so I'll stab at the clay with a gnarly brush covered in bacon bond, which should create tons of little bumps all over the surface of the base. All that's left to do then is make a big slobbery tongue for this botanicled pumpkin horror, so I'll smoosh and shape a ball of clay into a tapered pointy flat tube that I'll then draw a line down the center and pull the clay outwards to create a tongue-shaped shape that I can add some texture to the top of with a silicone shaper and an alcohol-infused brush before stabbing it with a toothbrush for that final pory texture. I'll then press the tongue into the bottom row of teeth until it's stuck in place, and that's the sculpting of my Halloween pumpkin finished, which means it's time to add some color. I wanted to try something a little bit different with the coloring here, so I'll remove the pumpkin from the base, and instead of base coating in black or dark green, I'm gonna set the shadows with a dark blue base coat first. I figured if you want to get green, then you mix blue and yellow, so by setting my shadows in dark blue, I can build up from the base by layering subsequent layers of lighter green on top to create a nice gradient between the top and the bottom and make it look extra spooky. I'll then apply the same process to the pumpkin, starting with a deep red as my base coat, and while I'm at it, I'll give the tongue a deep red base coat as well, followed by a couple coats of pinks to make it look nice and fleshy, before going back to the pumpkin to build up the orange top coat by adding several layers of yellows over the red to mix them in the middle, add a dark orange in all the recesses with a lighter orangey, almost yellow on the highest points. I really liked how the vines turned out, and I want to recreate that for the stem, but I don't want to lose the orange on the pumpkin, so I'll cover the top of the pumpkin in some masking putty, which will allow me to spray the blue and green of the Botanicles without ruining all my red and yellow work beneath. This stuff peels off nice and easy and really only sticks to itself, so it peels away, leaving my coat beneath unblemished. While I was base coating, I decided I really liked the bright red eyes, so I'll use my airbrush to lay an initial dark red back onto the eyes, letting it overspray onto the surrounding skin before dotting the eyes with a white that will allow me to lay some fluorescent red in the center to make them look extra bright. I can then set the airbrush aside and clean up the stems where the putty blocked the base by touching it up with a bluish green, then I'll rim the eyes in a red wash and add a watery red wash down the creased sections of each segment, as well as add some reds and pinks to the lips and gums to make them look a little bit fleshier. Now, originally I had sculpted the teeth in translucent clay thinking I'd just tint them with a bit of sepia wash, but I forgot to cover them in masking putty and they've got several layers of paint on top that even a cotton bud soaked in alcohol won't remove, so I'll have to settle for painting them white and washing them with that sepia to create a gnarly, toothy discoloration. Finally, I can poke each eye with a pair of dots to give them a little fake shine before giving them some real shine with a coat of UV resin. I can then fit the tongue back into the mouth and add a whole lot of drool and slobber with the help of some extra sticky, extra stringy Fabri-Tac glue. I'll then set that aside to dry while I bring the Botanical base back so I can fit a little flickering LED tea light into the center, which the pumpkin head will fit perfectly over top. And it kinda looks shit. I don't think this LED gives off enough light, and I don't think I want to put a real flame inside a small clay pumpkin, which means we'll just have to appreciate this pumpkin monster without any interior lights. Otherwise, that's us done here, and on to the glamour shots. As always, a big ol' thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon, and a special hey how are ya to the newest of them, Ethan and Lana, We Love Wormy Dealies, Michael Williams, Celestial Phoenix, Babu Pastafangu, Trent, Brand, and I'm also Brand. You are the multiple eyes that allow this gourd of a channel to see. Happy Halloween, everybody. This might be the first topical video I've ever released on the day it's supposed to be released. So mark your calendars, I guess. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.